I'm Rose Cushing, host of Carolina Hoofbeats TV, and we're in Pelletier, North Carolina this morning, and that's kind of near Swansboro and Emerald Isle,
Correct.
about 3 miles outside of there. Beautiful little community, and we're with Margaret Poindexter, and Margaret is the president of the Shackelford Banks Foundation.
Foundation for Shackelford Horses.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys realize this, but we have wild horses in all different parts of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And Shackelford Banks is an island, correct?
Correct.
Where a herd lives that I've never taken time to explore. So I'm very curious about it, as I'm sure you will be. So, Margaret, tell us a little bit about the horses there.
Sure. So Shackelford Banks is a part of the Cape Lookout National Seashore. It is off the coast of Harker's Island. And is one of the islands that makes up the National Seashore. And the herd there, it's currently around 116, 118 horses. They are federally protected. There's legislation that ensures that they will be preserved and protected and in sufficient numbers to ensure their genetic diversity and therefore their survival. And they are confined to the island, which is only accessible by ferry or by private boat. There's no cars over there, no vehicle traffic, and they are essentially, other than the birds and the turtles and maybe some raccoons and a few other things, the only inhabitants of that island. Although we do get a lot of tourists and locals that like to visit Shackelford Banks and see the wild horses that live there.
Now, how big of an island is that? Do you know?
Shackelford is approximately 9 miles long and about a mile wide in places at its widest. And it is about a 20 to 30 minute ferry ride from either Harker's Island or Beaufort.
Okay. So it's on out in the ocean a little ways. It's
That's
not right there at it. So.
That's correct. So
Yeah.
a lot of folks are confused and think when they're on Front Street in Beaufort and the horses that they see directly across from Front Street, that's Shackelford Banks. That's not. That's
Right.
Carrot Island, which is a part of the Rachel Carson Reserve, which is state-owned property. Shackelford is on out beyond that a little further.
It's a true barrier island.
It is.
So those horses have withstood many, many storms, I would guess. And
Absolutely. They've been there, we believe, for centuries. There's a lot of documentation about the wild horses roaming all the Outer Banks of North Carolina for centuries. And lots of recorded histories of human involvement with those horse herds over the years. But essentially, there was at a time when thousands of horses lived along the entire length of the Outer Banks. Now we have 3 distinct herds in North Carolina. There are the Corolla horses, which are up in Dare County, between Corolla and Corova. In that area, there are the Ocracoke horses, which are Ocracoke's part of the Cape Hatteras National Seashore, and that herd is confined and managed by the National Park Service. And then we have the Shackelford horses on Shackelford Banks. The Rachel Carson horses are a little separate in that the origin is somewhat different. There some interspersing there of maybe some domestic horses that were put over on Carrot Island, but nonetheless there is a lot of genetic similarity with the Shackelford horses as well. So.
And the Shackelford horses' genetics trace back to the Spanish Mustangs?
That's correct. They have been genetics tested, and they have a variant which links them genetically to Spanish Mustangs, most closely related to Puerto Rican Pasafinos, the Pryor Mountain horses out west. And so, yes, there is definitely a link to Spanish horses that were brought to the New World centuries ago.
Well, that makes sense with all of the mystery and the lore about the ships that have sunk, that they would have swam to the nearest shore and they would have had to survive.
That's the belief about how they got here, that they were either the ships ran aground and the horses were offloaded in order to perhaps try to free the ship from the shoals, or in fact the ship crashed and the horses swam for their life. But but they nonetheless ended up there, became a part of the local culture. There are recorded histories that document their being used by life-saving stations over the years, being used in military operations, commandeered by soldiers and used during the Civil War. Of course, they were used for various farming functions by folks who inhabited the Outer Banks years ago, and continued to be pinned every year by the locals and dipped for ticks and branded and claimed as personal property for years. And then finally, when folks abandoned the Outer Banks and moved to the mainland, the horses were left behind and left to roam free. But their origins are, as we said, genetically linked to early Spanish exploration of our coast.
That's so amazing. And that dates back to what, about the 1500s?
That's correct.
Let our family business create family adventures here at K&M Trailer Sales.
Mike Smith with K&M Trailer Sales, conveniently located right off Highway 152 in Rockwell, North Carolina. Come see me. I'm sure I got a trailer for you.
And then they became protected through your foundation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So in the early to mid 90s, the National Park Service was concerned about the numbers of horses that occupied Shackleford Banks. There had been a time when there had been all kinds of livestock that lived over on the Outer Banks. And once the park took over that property from the state of North Carolina, most of the livestock was removed, the cows, the sheep, and the goats, and the horses were left. And of course, in the absence of those other competing livestock breeds, the horse herds multiplied. And they were concerned that the numbers of horses on Shackleford were insufficient, or were too much for the sufficiency of the forage that was available there and the impact that they were having. And so they proposed to reduce the horse herd, and their proposal was to leave a representative herd, if you will, of wild horses on Shackleford, and they were talking about somewhere between 50 and 60 horses. And the locals were very concerned about that proposal. They were concerned, first of all, because the initial proposal had been to remove them completely.
Right.
That the desire was really to get rid of the horses altogether. But they did some research and became concerned that 50 to 60 was an insufficient number for the herd to survive and thrive genetically. And so they organized, formed the foundation, solicited help from Congressman Walter Jones, the late Congressman Jones, who represented this area, and prevailed upon him to introduce legislation to protect the herd, and he did secure passage of that legislation. We like to say that it was sort of a perfect political storm, if you will. It was back in the day when Washington actually functioned across the aisle, if people can remember that far back. But we had folks here at the state level who were very concerned about the future of that herd, having heard about it for years. You learned about North Carolina history in fifth grade, and so people all across the state knew about these horses and their history. So we had Betty Ray McCain, who was the head of the Department of Cultural Resources back then. We had Governor Hunt, who was very supportive of efforts to save the herd. We had, of course, Congressman Jones's efforts in the House, and he joined with those on the Senate side, Senator Jesse Helms, and other prominent members of Congress who were responsive to his plea. And then once the bill went to the White House, we had President Clinton, who was in the White House, whose chief of staff was a native North Carolinian, Erskine Bowles. And so all of that, came together to to secure the passage of that legislation, which requires that the Park Service maintain a herd on the island of between 110 and 130 horses, which is a number sufficient to ensure their survival. And then, secondly, that the Park Service work together with the foundation to co-manage that herd. So our organization is designated in the federal legislation as the
Nice.
co-managers of the herd, and so we have a say-so, and we work together with the Park Service to make the management decisions that we hope will ensure the protection and the survival of that herd for future generations.
That is such a part of our history and our culture, and just there's nothing more magical than a wild horse.
That's right.
And to think about the ships and the people coming to the new world, and the horses made it. I mean, that's just such a statement that they have to be protected.
Well, it's also it's so important, I believe, for folks here, because it is our connection with the banks. For generations, people
Right.
lived there. There were communities on Shackleford and on core banks where there were whaling communities, fishing communities, farming communities, and eventually hurricanes made it impossible to sustain life over there, and folks had to leave and move to the mainland. But they left the horses behind, and the horses have endured, and that is their continued connection and to that place that is so special and so sacred.
Absolutely. And the horses forage for themselves. They're not fed or given water or anything.
No.
They make it on their own pretty much.
That's
don't they?
correct. In fact, our management plan for the horses and our cooperative agreement with the park is that we leave them alone and let them survive naturally. We do not interfere. We don't provide food. We don't provide veterinary care. We don't deworm them, vaccinate them. They are left on their own to survive. We will only interfere in a situation where we believe that there is suffering, in which case we will consult with a veterinarian to make a decision about whether it's appropriate to humanely end the horse's life. We have also intervened in some situations where we had newborns that were perhaps injured, or in a situation that for example, we had one where the mare was in bad shape and the foal, as a result, was in bad shape, and to continue to leave the foal there for the mare to care for was likely going to result in the death of both of them.
Right.
And so, we removed the foal in a hope that it would give the mare an opportunity to regain strength and perhaps give the foal a chance at life too. So we have done that, but we only intervene in those very rare circumstances.
Hi, I'm Jesse Chase of Jesse Chase Performance Horses in Wendell, North Carolina, and I'm proud to feed Mule City Feeds. Mule City was first recommended to me by a vet who felt that I would benefit from a custom mitt. Overall, I've been thrilled with the customer service at Mule City Feed, the quality of products that they use, and how my horses have looked and performed since making that change. So stop by today and check out Paul Dunn at Mule City Feeds.
We only intervene in those very rare circumstances. The other thing that we do is we control the size of the herd through birth control. And initially, we had so many horses on the island. When we first got started with this co-management, it necessitated removing some horses early on, and we made those decisions based on genetics and the genetic diversity of the herd. So in other words, family lines that were better represented, we felt comfortable removing some representatives from those family lines from the herd. Others that we felt like were what we characterize as thin lines, we left them alone and get to give them an opportunity to flourish or not,
Right.
depending on how nature saw fit to handle that. But once we got the herd size down to the desirable levels, then we have managed since that time with periodic use of birth control. And over time, actually, attrition has taken care of it. The births have been offset typically every year by natural death, old age death. And we only birth control now in pretty rare situations, most commonly when we have an older mare who has contributed to the gene pool over time. And we birth control her in later life so that she can live out her late years in peace. And nothing makes me any happier than to see these older mares who are fat and happy and living on their own and
Just being grandma.
having a great quality of life in later years. So.
Right. That is so outstanding. I can't wait to go see them. Do you have a facility where people can go and see them and learn about them?
So there are a couple of options for that. First of all, the foundation is an all-volunteer board, and there is no paid staff. And in terms of facility, our one of our board members has generously donated the use of part of her property for what we characterize as our adoption farm, and that's where we take any horses who are removed from the island, and we acclimate them to domesticated life and then make them available for adoption. It's also the place where if we ever have to take a horse back that we have adopted, and we do that, our agreement provides that if for any reason the horse needs to be surrendered, we take the horse back, no questions asked, or we facilitate the rehoming of that horse if folks need that kind of assistance. But so that adoption farm is where those residents currently live, and we have a handful of them there now. And then, so people can come there by appointment. Again, it's a private home, a private farm, and so it's not open for regular hours. But by appointment, we do have groups that come in and visit us there. And then the other option is the Park Service offers what they call their Horse Sense and Survival Tours. Those are put on by the resource manager who is responsible for the horses. Her name is Dr. Sue Stuska. And she has been in that position since we started down this journey 20 years ago. And she's incredibly knowledgeable about the horses. And she takes tours over. She usually schedules about a dozen of those a year. And the park announces those dates for those tours. And she takes groups over and she teaches people about the horses, how to respectfully observe the horses. She talks about their habits, the things that make them unique, their behaviors, how they live in family groups or harems. And there is no cost for those trips. You have to pay for the ferry transport, and sometimes they depart out of Beaufort, sometimes they depart out of Harker's Island, but that's another opportunity to go over and learn about the horses in their native environment, which is incredibly fascinating.
Absolutely. Are the gene pools at Ocracoke and Corolla and here the same, or are they different? I guess they would be different because likely the same ships didn't crash at the same times, but
well, they are all considered Spanish
Just in a
colonial horses, but of the Banker strain, so they are arguably all related. We have, in fact, in the last few years, knowing that the Corolla horses, for example, have a smaller genetic variation than we do here at Shackelford, talked with those folks about the infusion of horses into their herd up there, and a horse of Shackelford parents that went to Cedar Island was eventually adopted by the folks in Corolla and introduced into their herd up there to try to help with the genetic diversity in Corolla.
rural American lifestyle. It's how we work, and it's how we play. It's how we learn and how we enjoy the finer things in life. How we take care of our animals and tend to the land. It's a way of life. Has been for hundreds of years. Now there's a whole new way for rural America to watch TV.
And I guess their heritage, because of being Spanish colonial Mustangs, gives them a hardiness. And if you keep the gene pool strong, they retain that.
Absolutely.
And if it gets small, then they lose those characteristics.
That's true. And so that's important for them, but it's also important for us. And when looking at our domesticated horse population, you know, we have qualities in these banker horses that our domesticated horses need or may
Absolutely.
need in the future. And so that's another reason why these Spanish colonial horses, which are relatively rare on a global scale, are important to preserve. You know, for example, they have incredibly strong feet and require very little farrier care, assuming they don't develop other problems like founder or you know, have some sort of injury or whatever. But genetically, they have incredibly strong feet. They are relatively disease resistant. Even though in the first couple of years of life they have a strong parasite load, they shed that
That's incredible.
over time. And that, you know, and so there's not the necessity of deworming for the most part. I mean, again, you're going to see individuals that don't necessarily have that characteristic, but the herd as a whole
Right.
exhibits those tendencies. And then when you look at their environment and where they live and how they've managed to adapt and survive over the years, it's incredible.
It is. I mean, to find fresh water on the island and know where to go to get that and to not drink the salt water, and Mother Nature takes care of all that.
Well, there is fresh water on the island. There are some ponds that are freshwater. There is a freshwater lens under the surface of the water, and it rises to the surface. And so sometimes you will see the horses digging for the water on the island. If they don't have access to the watering hole, for example, or at a time of day when it's not their turn to
Right.
go to the water hole, you may observe a horse that is pawing the ground. What they're doing is to release that freshwater lens to bubble up, and then they drink from that.
I guess people that haven't ever grown up in this area don't realize that we hit water about 6 inches down. So finding water is not so hard on the mainland as it would be there, but they're smart enough to do that.
That's right.
That's amazing.
That's right.
And the horses that have gone on to be adopted, what has become of them? What do they usually excel at? Or
Right. So we've had the experience of having adopted out almost 80 horses at this point over the course of the 20 years that we've been doing this. And some of them were taken to Cedar Island and turned and made a part of the herd that existed up there at one time, so they could continue to live in the wild in an environment similar to Shackelford up there. But then other individuals who were adopted by individuals have gone on to do things like trail riding. They have been lesson ponies. They have been party ponies, if you will,
Right.
and just pasture pets. They are the folks that ride them on a regular basis tell us, or that have just worked with them and trained them, tell us that they are among the smartest horses they have ever worked with. It's not a question of whether they can learn what you're asking them to do. It's whether you can ask it in a way that convinces them
Right.
that that's what they need to do.
right.
They are you mentioned the hardiness earlier. That's why they make such great trail mounts, because they can go all day without getting tired. And although they're relatively small in stature, they can carry a fully grown adult male without getting tired.
Right.
They are So they are incredibly versatile. We have had folks that have taught them to drive and use them as cart horses, and they're basically suitable for just about anything that you want to do. They have they don't trot as we think of it. Traditionally, they have more of a sort of a 4-beat gait that is similar to. Some people have compared it to like the Icelandic horses or the fjords in that kind of motion. So it's a very comfortable gait to ride. Again, making for a horse that if you intend to do a trail ride of long duration, they're a great mount for that. So
That is so incredible. So tell us a little bit about Tupper.
So this is Tupper. He is a 19-year-old Shackelford Banks horse. He's a gelding. He was foaled in 2000 on the island. Back during that time, we were removing horses in order to bring the herd size down to a number that the island could support. And we were selecting horses for removal based on genetics. And so those families, as I mentioned, those families that were well represented, we chose those family members for removal. In his case, his sire and dam had been together for a number of years, and they had produced all males.
Right.
So at that time, we had several male representatives from this family line on the island. And so Tupper and his brother were chosen for removal in 2001. I ended up adopting Tupper and have had him ever since. And as I said, he's 19 now, and so he's been our, beloved family pet since that time.
Do you ride him?
I have not ridden him. He's just been Zoe, my mare's male companion all this time, all these years. And that's one thing that people need to know about the foundation and the work that we do is that the genetics, the family lineages are very important to us. Very important for making decisions about management, potential removals or birth control. And so we have kept those records and kept track of that for generations, and we rely on experts to help us with that testing. That's one of the things that the foundation, that our work goes to support, and that we raise money for, is for genetics testing and parentage testing, and that sort of thing, so that we can make sure that we are making informed decisions.
And what kind of fundraisers do you do, and how, if the audience wanted to do something to help you, how could they?
Sure. So we have periodic fundraisers, events here, typically in the local community, but you can also donate online on our website. We have periodic Facebook fundraisers. Folks are very generous with sponsoring fundraisers on their birthdays on Facebook. That's been a great tool for us. We send out a Christmas letter every year to folks, letting them know what their donated dollars go to pay for. For example, feed for the adoption horses, or farrier or vet care for the adoption farm horses. And so, we're very grateful for however folks want to contribute to us, whether it's the old-fashioned way, mailing us a check, or online now on one of those platforms.
Now, I don't know if the viewing audience realizes this, but the North Carolina State horse is a Spanish colonial Mustang, and that's not just reserved for the Corolla horses, which are probably the best known, but that's all of them. The Ocracoke Island, Cedar Island herd, and the Shackelford Banks herd, they're all Spanish colonial Mustangs. So this guy has a big part of our history as well as our hearts. Thank you so much for sharing him with us.
Thank you. Thanks for coming to meet him.
Thank you.